The explosive cry bellowed forth from the filly's young lungs. The piece of wood wrapped in magic swung around the air like a stake being welded into by a maniac. A guard raised his own sword down just to pry her swing. The powerful bellows letting out the strong crackling sound as they struck. His footsteps flattered slightly. The stallion stepping back as he tried to counter with his guard, only to be pushed back by her repeatedly, furious strikes. Something was off and different that day. Her mind was intensely focused. The only thing she could see now was the flurry of her blade, the wood swinging faster than she ever swung it before. The clash of the magical energies burst up with each clash, creating the small shock waves that sailed outward from each contact. The guard was having difficulty keeping up, but managed to block each of the blows aimed at his way. His hoof dug an inch in the ground, bracing himself for the next attack. The little filly roared once more, expelling all the air from her lungs as she concentrated in her power, attempting to a single deceptive blow. Her blade then made another aurora of magical energy, distorting the view from the world for a moment as the powerful entities met. Then the loud snapping of wood echoed across the field as a shockwave burst from the point of the contact. Part of the wooden blade flew into the air before crashing down onto the grassy field. The little filly panted heavily. Sweat matted her mane against her forehead as she dropped the broken blade from their magical grip. Her instructor looked at her curiously, having never seen her this behavior from his student before. "Something on your mind?" He spoke simply. "It's nothing," Twilight spat, before turning around and walking towards the shed. Her horn lit up with her magic and wrapped around the handle of a fresh training sword and awaiting in the barrel next to the shed, slashing it through the air twice to make sure her magic was still alright. "I've never seen you this hostile before. Normally you could summon the steeled and steady eyes of a swords pony in training, but today..." He looked down at the broken handle that she had just dropped before him and tapped with his hoof. "Today there's a fire burning inside you." "So what if there is?" the filly groaned, turning her face to the instructor while pointing the wooden sword at him. "You're the one who is told me to harnessing my emotions would benefit my training. Well, guess what? I'm doing what you told me to do." Her breath was rage and filled with venom. Her hair was losing its odorly touch. Emotions powerful enough to destroy the reinforced training blades aren't something should just be looked over. "Tell me, what is it on your mind, child?" he asked, almost in a fatherly voice. "I just don't want to. Just fight me again." Twilight gritted her teeth in frustration, swinging the blade again for emphasis. "I'll make you a deal then." He shifted his body to face her fully, slashing his own blade for her emphasis. "Land your fist, strike on me, I'll drop the subject. If you fail again, you must tell me." Twilight's eyes twitched at this proportion, her teeth grinding harder at the thought of having to tell him what was going on in her mind. "Fine, then I'm going to channel everything I am feeling and use everything you have taught me to finally beat you. I hope you know what I've asked for." She huffed loudly, her nostrils flaring as she dug her hoof into the crash, ready to charge at the larger stallion. "If you truly no longer need my assistance, then I welcome it," he said, raising his blade, ready to face her. The filly let out another roar, rushing down and pushing everything she had into her legs. Her limbs felt stiff, her lungs were starting to burn, her body was covered in sweat. She could honestly feel the magic being strained into her limits. But none of that mattered right then. She could see nothing but the stallion before her and her desire for victory. Sparks flew from her magic as the blades crossed, grinding against each other, before returning to the flurry once more. She didn't care about them. She didn't care about the technique. Her body and magic guided itself. She jumped out of the way of a blow that might have hit her, and in that position, that better strike her foe. Each move was accompanied by the intense cracking of the strike of the blades, hitting one another. Sweat dripped from her forehead as she moved to keep the sweat out of her eyes. Seemingly invincible opponent was stepping in turn, matching her blow for blow once more. Her anger then began to boil. She could feel it in her blood. She wanted to hit him. She wanted to beat him. She wanted to win. She wanted nothing more than to win, to be right, to be victorious. She had known better. She had to be amazing. She had to be the best that he'd ever encountered. She couldn't be anything but less. If she was, she would be nothing more than a disappointment. She then let everyone down she knew. She let all the ponies she cared about down. She let down her parents and let her down her own brother. She let Princess Celestia. She couldn't. She had to win. She had to. Ah! The filly's cry echoed throughout the courtyard as her magic surged powerfully once more and lashed out. The initial strike was then blocked once more, but she wasn't going to let it go his way. Not this time. She poured magic onto the blade, pushing it back against him as powerfully as she could. He stepped back, pushing back with his own magic on stop on her slot. That was then she made her move. The filly let out her magic burst. The power of the exploding magic sent her blade skyward, pushing her instructor back in the process. He was caught by surprise, not having to be prepared for her to explode her magic in his face. His eyes went skyward to see the wooden blade falling towards him from the sky. The sword was then wrapped in a purple glow, as it was thrust straight down at him with an intention to kill. With an age exercise as the stallion's own sword was raised and then slashed in perfect timing, deflecting the blade to its side. It was exactly what she wanted. As the blade twirled around towards her, she opened her mouth, catching it by the handle. The guard's eyes shot downward as the filly swung her neck back to strike. Her eyes were focused on him. She was open before her blade was flying. Her target was there and she could do it. She could hit him. A shockwave of magic exploded through the field once more. The sound of the wood striking and crackling loudly echoed throughout against the stone walls. A wooden blade flew out of the air once more, before hitting the ground hard. The little filly's body struck down next, collapsing in a fit of exhaustion and sweat. The experienced stallion then looked down at her, his sword lifted, his maneuver gracefully executed, as he all of his other moves. At the very last second, he had managed to dodge a blow that, if it had been a real battle, very well could have finished him for good. Arrgh! Twilight groaned, her body shaking as she lay on the ground. She lifted her hoof gently before slamming it back, whatever energy she had left, back onto the grass. Damn it, she panted as she tried to get her breath back. The next older stallion watching her as her body seemed to crash from the physical exhaustion and the toll of her emotions that had played on her. He turned her away for a moment, floating his wooden blade to the barrel where they had kept, and slid it inside. I must admit to my surprise, the stallion spoke softly, stepping closer to the little filly before sitting down beside her, watching her as she shook. You're the first trainee to come too close to hitting me for a long while. You brought back some old memories of battles I have long since I fought it had covered in dust. He then chuckled softly. Making this light conversation with her mind was more than trying to catch up to itself. But I still wasn't good enough, she said. Her breath was trying to hold back the sobs that were threatening to break. The old guard then blinked in a little confusion, looking at the filly who had just yet the prime of her life. You're faced with an opponent who has already rarely known defeat, my pupil. He furrowed his brow. Your training was meant to improve your simple swordsman skills, never to obtain victory or skills beyond your level. You took this as a hobby, not because your mind was set on besting me one day. He then raised a hoof and placed it gently against her shoulder. What is bugging you, my child? Twilight sniffled, wiping her face away with her hoof, before finally managed to gather enough strength to get herself to sit up. She didn't look at her teacher in the face, but she took a little encouragement from the hoof that grazed her shoulder. She stared at the ground, trying to focus her thoughts from the relentless emotions that were swirling in her mind. She took several deep breaths, letting herself think of what she wanted to say, before finally picking up the words she wanted. Just a few days ago, my brother's shining armor almost officially got accepted into the Royal Guards as a trainee. He left to just begin his training. She then smiled softly, only just loud enough for his aging ears to pick up of what she was saying. You should know what that means. Better than anyone, he's off to the prestigious Canterlot Military Academy. Rigorous study and physical training, As a unicorn, he'll be under heavy magic study too. I've taught there a lot to know about the grueling it can be." He then nodded his head slowly. "Exactly, he's off. He's there at that academy." She then felt her teeth clench as the memories of the following days came to her mind once. He's training. He started on the road of what he was going to do for the rest of his life. He is going to be a guard. He's going to be an amazing pony. Someone who defends Equestria, who defends Princess Celestia, who defends ponies like me. He's going to be great. He's going to be doing something amazing with his life. Something important. Her hooves were raising up to match the inflections of her voice. The aged stallion didn't say a word in response. Knowing nothing he could say or would add would make the situation better, the filly finally lowered her hooves, calming down as her story continued. "So what am I going to do with my life?" She closed her eyes tightly. "What am I doing? Studying magic? Every pony uses magic in their own way. How will study make me special?" She pressed her hoof against her head. "What am I going to add to this? What do I plan to accomplish? I'm Princess Celestia's personal portrait, for heaven's sake. I can't be just a normal unicorn. I have to be amazing as well. I have at least to match my brother, or at least have to live up to what she sees me, and how I can do to with no dream." The last words were then added by another sound of roar as she slammed her hooves onto the ground, hanging her head in frustration. "What good am I if I can't even succeed in the things I set out to do?" "I see. So that's what's been troubling your mind." The aged stallion brushed a hoof against his chin. His eyes then closed in thought. "Those are strong words you have said against yourself, and indeed they are true. How do you plan to succeed if you don't believe that you can?" Twilight was silent to his question, glaring down at the grass as if doing so would solve her problems. Her cheeks were slowly become more stained with tears, and even drops of it hitting the ground as he stared. Finally just starting to feel some sort of weight being lifted after having vented her troubles. "I can understand some pressure you're going through. Being taken as the prince's personal portrait as is an incredible opportunity. I'm certain here there are thousands of unicorns who would give their life to be where you are now." Those words had brought a little comfort to the young filly. "But let me tell you a story about half a hot-headed colt who thought that he knew he wanted in life." The little filly then turned her head slowly to look at the aged stallion. "Growing up, he got into all sorts of trouble. His parents found him under a bit of a nightmare. He climbed over everything in the house, terrorized the neighborhood kids, and he was a bit of a taunted at school. But there was always one thing that was true about him." The stallion cracked a weary smile. "He always stood up for what he believed was right. Whatever it was, a bully or a thief, a vandal or an escaped convict, he would stand up and chase down the person who had done wrong to the ponies around him. He never knew what he wanted to do growing up. At all he knew he had to help the ponies. School was boring, people disliked him for being a hoodlum, and no pony seemed to have cared what became of him. It appeared that he was doomed for his life as a street rat. Not enough money for food, homeless and no friends, or not even anyone to care if he lived or died. He lived his life, completely unsure of what else he was to do. Then a rather amazing moment happened. Princess Celestia was having his town a visit, and he wanted nothing more to do than to see her for himself. However, during her visit, he even found out that some of the angry hoodlums wanted to do her harm, so they tried to attack the princess. Before the guards could react, that little colt tackled the hoodlums and tried to fight them off alone. You can imagine it didn't go well. When the colt awoke in the hospital, he found out that the guards had taken care of the hoodlums and they were carted off to jail for questioning. He was happy that the princess was safe, but then who else but the princess herself walked into this hospital? He let out a soft chuckle. In fact, what a surprise, huh? She then spoke to him personally, saying that he was eternally grateful that he had stepped into to help her. However, she was worried about why, when he could have been terribly injured. The colt said that he didn't have any reason to live, so at least he could do was to help her. Naturally, the princess didn't like this answer very much. On one spot, she had decided that she was going to enlist him into the military academy. At first, he was confused, but she explained to Dad that if he felt that his life had no purpose, then he could find one, working hard to become one of her royal guards. So naturally, the feeling that he had nothing in life, he accepted it and joined the academy. It was only natural that his hoodlum life caught up to him at the academy as well. He questioned orders, he didn't take studying seriously, and he was drawn to the drills. The instructors hated him. On 3 separate occasions, he came close to kicking out of the school, but for whatever reason, they kept him there. He was questioned to the point of staying at the school and drop out and go back to his life on the streets. When he was visited once more by the princess, she asked him directly how things had been going, and the colt decided that, to be honest with her, he figured that she would want him to do whatever for he was happy in his life, and it didn't appear to be that school offered. But after hearing the story, the princess seemed sad. I dare to say she looked disappointed. The colt was confused, thinking that he had done what she wanted. The princess said that he was free to make whatever choices in life he wanted, but that if he truly wanted to accomplish anything, he couldn't just sit around doing nothing. She wanted him to become something, to accomplish whatever dream it was that he was having in his heart. Before the princess left, she told him that he should give the academy another chance, and that this time he should try following his rules, seeing what happened. Confused, he returned to his room and sleep on her words, and then the next morning came around. He decided to give what she said a shot. He started obeying the drill instructors during the routines. He studied for the classes and demanded his attention. He even stated trying to get along with his fellow classmates. The colt said he didn't think he would want to be a part of the army of it, but the more he followed the teachers and the more he listened to the instructors, the more he found himself absorbed into the teachings. And before he knew it, he was at the top of his class, getting the best marks and performing better than any pony else had been seeing him personally. When he graduated, he was immediately accepted into the precious group of guards in Canterlot, the personal bodyguards of Princess Celestia herself. When he met her again, she seemed pleased to see him and happy to ask how he felt. The colt was speechless for a moment, not even sure how to react to the question, but he looked up at the princess, and then everything hit him. Where he was standing, who he was talking to, what he had done, what he had accomplished to get there. He had once thought that there was nothing left to his life, and now as a hoodlum he had no future. But there he was, standing where a few ponies ever believed that they could stand, walking with the ruler of the land. And it was all his doing. No pony had held his hoof, no pony had given him the benefit of the doubt, no pony had taken it so seriously or easy on him. He was all worked hard, and he had toiled for the grueling work and accomplished everything on its own. It was though as if he realized that he had accomplished something amazing. He had made something of himself. He had done something with his life. So when the princess asked her a simple question of how he felt, he returned it with a smile, saying, "I've never felt any better in my life." Twilight then stared at the old man and wondered in fascination of her face filling as she absorbed every detail of the aged stallion's story. He looked down at her smiling, giving a pause as she wiped her face down from the tears and gave another sniff. "You're still young, kiddo. You're way too young to be thinking that you think you are not doing anything with your life. The princess wouldn't have chosen you if she thought that you would mount to nothing." He then rested his hoof on top of her head and gently shook her mane. "It's okay to not exactly know where your life is taking you right now, but I know you're going to do amazing things, Twilight. You're a brilliant kid. You have a magical talent, and I have never seen that in any unicorn in my life. To me, that already makes you some pony worth." The smile on the little filly's face slowly brightened. The smile stretched from cheek to cheek as she heard those words, looking up at the aged stallion with hope and renewing her body. "Now I don't want to hear any more nonsense of you thinking you're worthless. You hear?" This was met with a quick and happy nod from the young filly. "Good. I think we've had enough training for one day. I'd say you should go take a relaxing bath and then do something you consider fun to relax and unwind. Then you could put everything you have into studying tomorrow." "Yes!" Twilight beamed with once more, nodding her head as she got up from the grass. "From this day forth, I'm going to study hard and become the greatest unicorn who ever lived," she said happily, setting off to a brisk trot in the castle. "That kid's gonna grow up to do amazing things," the aged stallion murmured softly. He then returned his face to the wooden sword that still lay on the ground, his magic lighting up to gently lift it and place it neatly back into the barrel. A loud gasp erupted the air, filled Twilight's lungs once more. She coughed and sputtered as she quickly regained her consciousness. Gasping and sputtering as she struggled to fill her lungs with air, she sat up and placed a hoof against her mouth as she tried to control her violent coughing fit. It felt as if fire was burning in her lungs, and her coughing was the only thing that could put out the flames. It took several minutes before her coughing died down and slowly turned to heavy, panting breaths, as the world finally took a moment to stop spinning around her. Her eyes were squeezed shut as she looked into several deep breaths of air, feeling as if though she had been at a point of drowning, was returning to the world anew. Her eyes slowly flickered open from her coughing fit, the moisture blurring her vision. The world came in as dimly lit and murky colors that melded together in her vision. She quickly rubbed her face with her hoof, trying to bring back the world. She blinked a few times, clearing the last blur of her eyes, and looked around again. A familiar sight of Fluttershy's living room came into her vision. The deathly quiet house was the exact same condition as she had left it. Dusty, broken, and shambled in a mess. I'm alive! Twilight spoke out loud, placing her hoof against her cheek, as if trying to confirm of what just happened. Her hoof moved to feel her body. None of the burns she suffered were malformed as they were, if the acid had never touched her body. She pressed her hoof against the shoulder, and the broken alicorn ran her sword through. It found out somewhat okay, though instantly burst in her mind, and her hoof raised up to see if her horn was somehow returned to her. As it was there, sticking out of her forehead was the same as it always had. Her hoof brushing against the length of it, looking for any signs of damage or bloody or surgery, but it was as if nothing happened at all. The shock just washed over Twilight for a moment as her hoof gently lowered. She just stared at her horn, thinking about what she had gone through. Something surprised happened. A chuckle escaped her lips. It started off slow, but quickly became more. She then pumped up her emotions, her frustrations and her anger and confusion, her despair. It all came out just now. It all came out in a twisted, hollow, demented laugh that seemed to echo throughout the house. She couldn't believe it. The world was screwing with her. It was literally screwing with her mind and changing everything she had known about the world around her, because it could. It made her laugh. It made at least a haunting, bellowing chortle escape from her lips as she thought about the insanity she had lived through. At least 3 times that day, she had already brushed with death, and each time she had somehow came back alive, came back to brush with death again. Oh, I get it. Twilight then rubbed her hoof against her face as she felt her body shake from their laughter. You're trying to break me, trying to get me to escape death. She finally let her laughter begin to calm as he raised her hoof and against her eye, and she stared at nothing, just blankly into space. It's as if she was trying to stare at the world around her itself. You haven't broken me yet, world. She then closed her eyes, lowering her head and resting her hooves against the ground. You've crossed the line. I hope you realize, she growled. You're messing with my friends. The images of Rainbow Dash and Twilight and Fluttershy's bodies crawling out of the mirrors flashed in her mind. The images of them calling out for love. You can screw with me all you want. You can hurt me, torture me, twist the world into me playing by your rules. Her head rose, staring straight into empty space before her. But you do not mess with my friends. With the venom dripping from her mouth, she finally pushed herself up onto all of her hooves. She immediately felt that her body shifted a little unusually. Realizing that she could feel the weight of her items still stored within her magic inventory, she had come across its contents once more, the fact that she was relieved to know. Before she stepped forward, her eyes wandered around the ground before her. She had noticed the 2 odd items that she hadn't seen before. She recognized them. They were the 2 books that she had been carrying around her, the ones she had taken from Stalliongrad Library. Looking at the covers, she noticed something odd. One of the covers had vanished. It was just like a first look. Of the first 2 books, with one remaining over the cover was Heaven's Food, that meant for the old widow, no longer had words to it. Twilight flipped through the cover of the blank book just to double check. She flipped through the pages, seeing nothing written on it. She then looked at Heaven's Food and opened it once more, seeing the story neatly written inside, illustrations included. She quickly shut the book, wrapped it in her magic, and made it rejoin her bulky storage. I don't know what this means, she grunted softly, pushing the yellow blank book to the side with her hoof. If it's a clue, or something it's lost on me. She unclosed her eyes and took a deep breath. Trying to calm herself, she slowly opened her eyes once more and looked around the destroyed living room of Fluttershy's house. She was fairly certain at this point that Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash were no longer in the house. In fact, they may have not been at the house at all. She have kicked herself mentally for that. If it were half the ponies she knew them to be, they would have left them in the search for the others a long time ago. They weren't the type of ponies to stand around and do nothing while their friends might be in potential danger, especially not Rainbow Dash. It was likely that they haven't been there for a while. Calm down, Twilight. Just take a moment to think things through. She calmed herself by speaking out loud to something to break the deathly silence around her. Your friends would likely be out searching for you and the others, or to help the other ponies. You're out here getting lost in the warping, fog-riddled mazes that you've been falling into. Her eyes flickered back and forth, staring at an absolute nothing in particular as she thought of her plan. You don't know which way they have started healing. You don't even have a starting clue as to how'd you get in contact with them. This world seems to decide that where I can and can't meet ponies. Her thoughts went quiet with those words. A realization slowly dawned on her. It decides when I can meet ponies except for one. It wasn't a plan. It certainly wasn't even a lead. But there was one pony that she had met that had been dictated by the world by saying if she could or couldn't. One pony seemed to have to even defy the word that she was currently in. The one pony that was currently taking care of one of her dearest friends at that moment. I have to get back to Stalingrad Library, Twilight said, letting the confidence back in her voice. She stepped into the fallen debris of Fluttershy's living room. She quickly headed over to the door. She grabbed a hold of it with her in magic and opened it. It was staring out at the fog of the world once more. Her ears perked up and listened carefully, listening for any possible sound of the dragon that seemed to be guarding the town. Silence was all was greeted her, and a small smile formed on her face. She didn't feel like she was wasting any more time, just standing around. With determination, she broke out to a quick trot, heading straight towards Stalingrad Library. Twilight watched carefully from the edge of the building, spotting the slowly lurching figures in the fog making its way across the street. She could make out the details of what it looked like, but she had no doubt in her mind that it was an outline of the soldier that she encountered before. Every time she had encountered them in the streets of Ponyville so far, she found herself swarmed, surrounded by them, and only able to escape from the skin of her teeth. She wanted to get to Stalingrad Library without an incident, even if she had the sledgehammer to defend herself, which it wasn't going to do much against a whole pack of soldiers. The shadow was dragging its heavy weapon along the ground as usual, and she could hear the scraping of the metal on the stone, even from the distance. She kept her ears open, her ears fixated on the shadow moving through the fog. It didn't take very long for the shadow to finally disappear into the depths of the shadows. The scraping of the metal was slow to follow, but eventually the town returned to quiet, and before, nothing more than the sound of gentle breeze and the creaking of the old buildings. Finally releasing the breath she had been holding, Twilight stepped out from behind the building. The more normal scrape in her hooves was muffled as she walked, each step sinking into the thickened layer of ash that was now covered the ground. It continued to fall from the sky, a slow, never-ending outpour of soot. Twilight stuck close to the edges of the building, quickly breaking into a trot as she ran towards her destination. It wasn't far now. She knew exactly where it would be. Her ears were perked up at all times, trying to listen all to the sound of the creatures that wanted her to hide. The dragon had been nowhere to be heard so far, a fact that surprised her considering how close it has to come to Twilight's cottage. So as far as she only encountered the occasional soldier shambling through the hall downtown, all she carefully managed to maneuver around. For her efforts, she was finally rewarded with the sight of the building that came into view that she'd been looking for. With the heavy breaths out of her that fall from the large words Stalingrad Library. For once, something crazy in this world stayed consistent. She gave all of her blessings to the fact that the building hadn't somehow magically managed to vanish in the short time that she'd been gone. But it wasn't just the feeling of something familiar. In a word, heard that constantly changing, screwing with her mind. No, another emotion was welling up inside her. She wanted to see Spike. She had left him in the hooves of the only one pony in town that seemed to be even remotely qualified to be able to take care of him right now. A fellow researcher and published at that. He may have seemed a little off-putting, but there was some little possibility that he had somehow started all of this, but he still had to have the only safe haven in the entire town. She then climbed up to the steps of the Stalingrad Library, wanting to head straight back to meet the familiar face. Someone who could rest and lean on for at least a moment. But her hooves stopped at the door and a piece of paper came into view. To Miss Twilight Sparkle, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it appears that my intentional research wasn't as accurate as I believe. The symbol that I have placed in the barrier against the monsters has a time limit on how long it will work. I will need to do more research on it to how long it lasts, but needless to say, Stalingrad Library is no longer a safe haven for me and your companion. I will continue to ensure his safety and we move on to our next location. However, you not need to worry about that. His well-being is my top priority, so you may find your new safe haven. I am leaving a trail of notes for you. So far the monsters are unable to read, so we should be safe leaving them for you. This town will do crazy things to the mind if you let Miss Sparkle keep yourself strong. Magus V. Dark Arts. At the bottom of the page, a large arrow was pointing next to the east. Twilight's heart sank a little upon reeling the note, but relieved to hear that the safe haven had failed to the two of them, and they had managed to escape the library unscathed, at least enough to be able to write such an elaborate note. She quickly picked up the note and placed it within her storage, not wanting to lose in such important time. Though this did mean that she had to spend more time wandering through the ash-covered town, and in the air was thick with the burnt remains, and it was starting to make breathing more and more difficult. She was also now fearful for the dragon making a reappearance. She still had no proper means to defend herself from it. If she were to show up, she would have to rely on just running away, like she did twice before now, a tactic she feared that would not be able to be enough to save her again.